I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
For centuries, there have been reports of unidentified flying objects. These UFOs have taken various shapes and sizes. Many have claimed to have had close encounters with these objects, along with mysterious beings. Such experiences raise questions like, are we alone in the universe? Has the Earth been visited by other intelligent beings? Amid the modern UFO movement, one popular question is about the role of the government, particularly the CIA. Has the CIA been interested in UFOs? If so, has the CIA been involved in the investigation of such things? Does the CIA spy on civilian research groups? And is the CIA behind the mysterious Men in Black? Many believe that such figures as depicted in History Channel's Project Blue Book, that the famous Men in Black are actually CIA agents. But is such actually the case? We'll look at these questions and many more on today's episode of the Mysterian Files. One of the main questions that surrounds the UFO phenomena is the role of the government, particularly the CIA. So what has the CIA been doing with UFOs? Have they been researching UFOs, and to what extent? The forerunner to the CIA was the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, which was established by Roosevelt on June 13th, 1942. And the OSS investigated a lot of different things, including the so-called Foo Fighters, which were balls of light that would pace, track, follow, be around the pilots over there. And this is a major phenomena, and the OSS was responsible for investigating that. According to Richard Dolan in his UFOs and National Security State, within the world of intelligence, the Cold War started before World War II ended. OSS officers such as Alan Dulles realized the importance of obtaining Nazi spies with Soviet expertise. With OSS CIA money, they recruited the bulk of Hitler's Abwehr intact. For years, in fact, this organization actually reigned as the dominant intelligence service in West Germany before it was even legally constituted. Thus, an illegal foreign-funded group held more power than the official West German intelligence organization. So the CIA was born out of the intelligence failure of Pearl Harbor and throughout World War II. It was initially instituted to be an organization that would help ensure national security by focusing efforts on foreign spying, as it were. Now, the modern UFO movement era is recognized to have kicked off with Kenneth Arnold in 1947, that is June 24th. And there have been UFO sightings all around the world, as far back as history records, in terms of people seeing things in the sky they couldn't explain, UFOs, balls of light, all sorts of things that people saw. But the modern, even in the United States, people would see these airships, especially in the late 1890s. But the quote-unquote modern UFO phenomena really began with Kenneth Arnold on June 24th, 1947. He claims to have seen 9, what we would now call today flying discs, flying saucers. And this is just before the Roswell incident of, somewhat hard to date this, late June, early July. And then we have the Air Force being instituted as an organization, as a branch of the military, breaking off of the Army Air Corps in September of 1947, September 18th. Now, so as soon as the Air Force is born and brought into its own existence, it is thrust into the UFO enigma. So in 1947, 1948, late in 47, early 48, Project Sign was ordered to investigate UFOs. It was ordered on December 30th and began work on June 22nd. And as soon as it was ordered to be brought in as a special project to report UFOs and to investigate them. And remember, this is right after World War II, just a couple years after World War II. And there was a great scare, with the Red Scare, of the Soviets and maybe even Germans having technology that would pose a national security threat to the United States. So some of these sightings were feared to be Soviet in nature or other national technology. Although many, even in the Air Force and the government, believed that there was something more to this phenomena. And so Project Sign was enacted, followed by 3 so-called classic examples of UFO phenomena. Classic number 1, or incident number 1, is in January 7th, 1948. 25-year-old Kentucky Air National Guard pilot Captain Mantell died when he was flying his F-51 and crashed southwest of Franklin, Kentucky. So UFOs had been seen on radar and visually. This UFO, there had been other people in his squadron as well, but they went back to their base because of fuel. But he continued on, and he got very high in altitude. And there's a lot of debate about what really happened. Did he run out of oxygen? Did he black out? What happened exactly with this? But he did die chasing what he and others reported to be a UFO. July 24th, 1940, we have the Child's Whitted sighting. Classic number 2, a rocket-shaped object with 2 rows of square windows and flames shooting from its rear, streaked past a DC-3 flying 5,000 feet over Alabama. This comes from Jerome Clark in his monumental UFO encyclopedia. 1948, October 1st, the Gorman incident would give us classic number 3. Another 25-year-old second lieutenant from North Dakota National Guard chased a 6 to 8 inch light that he claims to have not known what it was. I'm not sure how they can determine how large something is of that small of a diameter, but they claimed it was a 6 to 8 inch light that was flying very erratically. They claimed it was a UFO. On February 11th, 1949, Project Sign becomes Project Grudge. And Project Grudge, by and large, was an attempt to kind of squash down the UFO problem. Until 1952. 1952, we see Project Grudge had kind of fizzled out, come back into a new Project Grudge, and became what we now know as Project Blue Book, which would have gone from March of 1952 until the end of 1969. Well, there was a famous flap in 1952 over Washington, D.C. Now, a flap in the context of UFOs means that there were a lot of sightings all at once in a relatively short amount of period or time. So there were UFOs seen over Washington, D.C. from both the civilian and the military airports. And it was all over the front pages. This is undeniable. These were seen by civilian and military personnel. And it alarmed a lot of people. In fact, President Truman, again, we're told by Jerome Clark, was disturbed by the media reports. And from Missouri, telephoned CIA Director General Walter Bedell Smith about July 28, 1952, ordering a CIA investigation of the Air Force handling of UFOs. Now, we're told in a very interesting document by Gerald Haynes, who was a CIA historian, in his document, CIA's Role in the Study of UFOs, 1947 to 1990, a Die-Hard issue, that the CIA was actually investigating UFOs. He says agency officials accepted the Air Force's conclusions about UFO reports, although they concluded that since there is a remote possibility that they may be interplanetary aircraft, it is necessary to investigate each sighting. And it was reported or recommended through all of this that the agency continue monitoring the problem in coordination with ATIC, which was the Air Technical Intelligence Center. He also urged that CIA conceal its interest from the media and the public in view of their probable alarmist tendencies to accept such interest as confirming the existence of UFOs. Now, given President Truman's concern Haynes says, although it had monitored UFO reports for at least 3 years, CIA reacted to the new rash of sightings in DC in 52 by forming a special study group within the Office of Scientific Intelligence, OSI, and the Office of Current Intelligence, OCI, to review the situation. So what had happened was the CIA wanted to investigate how the Air Force was investigating UFOs. And so they called for a panel that held in January of 1953 called the Robertson Panel, after a senior scientist. They met for several days and a total of about 12 hours of doing investigation onto the Air Force's own investigation into UFOs to see whether or not there was a warrant for further concern regarding national security. And they did not think that there was a real issue from the actual objects themselves. But they did recognize that there was a problem, one of the public being very alarmed due to this phenomena, and two, the worry, supposedly, that there would be a clogging of communication channels in case there were actually some kind of event from, say, the Soviet Union. The CIA said that there's a concern that the networks might be clogged with such a reaction from the public. Now, Jerome Clark and others have said that this is really not really an issue because the military had their own networks that wasn't built into the public networks, and they could have deployed and had their own investigations irrespective of what the public's outcry or alarmist concerns were. But Haynes says to meet these problems, the panel recommended that the National Security Council debunk UFO reports and institute a policy of public education to reassure the public of the lack of evidence behind UFOs. It suggested using mass media, advertising, business clubs, schools, and even the Disney Corporation to get the message across. Reporting at the height of McCarthyism, the panel also recommended that such private UFO groups as the Civilian Flying Saucer Investigators in Los Angeles and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization in Wisconsin be monitored for subversive activities. And this in itself became an issue and a concern from the public that the CIA was meddling and spying on its own people. Remember, the CIA was originally meant to be a spying arm internationally to help ensure national security here domestically. But the CIA was now saying in January of 1953 that we need to keep a look at these civilian groups to see if they're maybe adding fuel to this UFO fire, or if there's some kind of concern about Soviet spies infiltrating those groups and having some kind of a problem that will lead to a national security issue. An interesting aspect of all this regards another group called NICAP, which is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Now, the leader of this group for many years was Donald Kehoe, a retired major from the Marine Corps. But who was really interesting in this group was Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was on the board of governors for several years at the end of the 50s, from about 1957 to 1962. The interesting thing with Hillenkotter is he was a former CIA director. And he was also reportedly a friend of Donald Kehoe, I believe from Annapolis. They were in the naval school together. But it was interesting that we have a former CIA director on the board of governors for a civilian research group. So after the Robertson panel, and they made their recommendations to the Air Force, this is all very secretive and didn't come out until years later that they met and they had this report. The Project Blue Book by the Air Force became what we're told from both inside and outside of the organization was basically a public relations campaign. We know that they did study UFOs, but it was very obvious to those within the organization and those without who had dealings with them that the Air Force was not overly serious about getting to the bottom of what was going on with the UFO phenomena. Now, there were other ways the Air Force and the military did investigate UFOs in a more serious way, according to such things as JNAP 146, which stands for Joint Army-Navy Air Publication, which did two things. One, it made it a requirement for people who had seen UFO activity to report it to their base intelligence. And two, it made it a crime punishable by hefty fines and federal prison if they talked about their experiences to anybody else. The Robertson panel is argued had a detrimental effect on the Air Force and how the Air Force handled the UFO situation. It is also clear that the Air Force, the CIA, and other organizations use the UFO problem to cover up other secret technology. We're told again by Haynes, the Air Force Blue Book investigators, aware of the secret U-2 flights, tried to explain away such sightings by linking them to natural phenomena such as ice crystals and temperature inversions. By checking with the agency's U-2 project staff in Washington, Blue Book investigators were able to attribute many UFO sightings to U-2 flights. They were careful, however, not to reveal the true cause of the sighting to the public. According to later estimates from the CIA officials who worked on the U-2 project and the Oxcart SR-71 Blackbird project, over half of all UFO reports from the late 1950s through the 60s were accounted for by manned reconnaissance flights, namely the U-2, over the United States. This led the Air Force to make misleading and deceptive statements to the public in order to allay public fears and to protect the extraordinarily sensitive national security project. And it's been admitted by the Air Force that such Air Force Office of Special Investigations personnel like Richard Doty intentionally lied about sightings that people had claimed to have seen over places such as the U-2 spy project was over Area 51. And so Doty and others would claim that what they were really seeing possibly were UFOs. But this isn't the only area in which the Air Force and the CIA are charged with deception. Regarding the Mayer sisters having some kind of experience with an alleged radio signal, Leon Davidson, the ufologist Leon Davidson, contacted the Mayer sisters in 1957. According to Haynes, the sisters remembered they had talked with a Mr. Walker, who said he was from the U.S. Air Force. Davidson then wrote to a Mr. Walker believing him to be a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer from Wright-Patterson to ask if the tape had been analyzed at ATTIC, the tape of the radio signals. DeWalt Walker replied to Davidson that the tape had been forwarded to proper authorities for evaluation and no information was available concerning the results. Not satisfied and suspecting that Walker was really a CIA officer, Davidson next wrote DCI Alan Dulles demanding to learn what the coded message revealed and who Mr. Walker was. The agency, wanting to keep Walker's identity as a CIA employee secret, replied that another agency of the government had analyzed the tape in question and that Davidson would be hearing from the Air Force. In another attempt to pacify Davidson, a CIA officer, again undercover and wearing his Air Force uniform, contacted Davidson in New York City. The CIA officer explained that there was no super agency involved and that Air Force policy was not to disclose who was doing what. So again, we have here an example, an admission of the CIA's historian, Gerald Haynes, that we'd have CIA agents posing as Air Force officers and the Air Force going along with it. So there was no doubt CIA involvement regarding UFO research over the years. Now, around 1966, the government awarded the University of Colorado Boulder a grant to have an independent body of investigators now referred to as the Condon Committee, named after its main scientist, Edward Condon, to discover whether or not it was worthwhile to continue the UFO investigation. Evidently, the CIA had a part in that as well, because Gerald Haynes tells us this. In February of 1967, Giller contacted Arthur C. Lundahl, director of CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center, and proposed an informal liaison through which NPIC would provide the Condon Committee with technical advice and services in examining photographs of alleged UFOs. Lundahl and DDI R. Jack Smith approved the arrangement as a way of preserving a window on the new effort. They wanted the CIA and NPIC to maintain a low profile, however, and to take no part in writing any conclusions for the committee. No work done for the committee by NPIC was to be formally acknowledged. Now, the way that we have knowledge of a lot of this information is through the Freedom of Information Act. And if you're interested in this topic, a great book is called Clear Intent, written by Lawrence Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. The subtitle is The Government Cover-Up of the UFO Experience. And this book is very well known and referred to a lot in UFO literature. And the interesting thing about this book and these researchers is that they were able to use a new tool that the government had given the people called the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. They say, what is the Freedom of Information Act and how does it work? In 1966, Congress acted to increase public access to government records. It provided that any records, documents, memoranda, statements of policy, and other similar materials be made available to those persons who requested such data. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this, especially documents that are seen to legitimately be sensitive to national security. And Gerald Haynes says this: in September 1977, Spaulding and GSW, stands for Ground Saucer Watch, unconvinced by Wilson's response, filed a Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, lawsuit against the agency that specifically requested all UFO documents in CIA's possession. Deluged by similar FOIA requests for agency information on UFOs, CIA officials agreed, after much legal maneuvering, to conduct a reasonable search of CIA files for UFO materials. Despite an agency-wide unsympathetic attitude toward the suit, agency officials led by Lonnie Zebel from the Office of General Counsel conducted a thorough search for records pertaining to UFOs. Persistent, demanding, and even threatening at times, Zebel and his group scoured the agency. They even turned up an old UFO file under a secretary's desk. The search finally produced 355 documents totaling approximately 900 pages. On 14 December 1978, the agency released all but 57 documents of about 100 pages to GSW. It withheld these 57 documents on national security grounds and to protect sources and methods. So the Freedom of Information Act was an unbelievable tool for ufologists to be able to use the government's own policies, somewhat, quote unquote, against these agencies who did not want to play ball, as it were, or give them access to such documents. So this was an amazing time for ufologists and other areas of research as well, to be able to find out what the government knew, what they were doing. And so there was a lot uncovered in this, not only with the CIA, but the FBI, all other different kinds of different agencies. And if you want that, again, I'll leave a link that in the description, but it's Clear Intent. I have discussions with the CIA, FBI, and others regarding how and what they did regarding UFO investigations. Possibly one of the most interesting and fascinating and mysterious aspects of the UFO enigma as it relates to the CIA regards these so-called men in black. So it is not uncommon for people to have had some kind of experience with UFOs, and then people dressed sometimes and oftentimes in black suits, driving black vehicles like Cadillacs, to show up and to be very threatening to people And it was weird because the people they hadn't even talked to anybody else yet about their sightings and experience. But here are these people all of a sudden on the scene after no time at all, with knowledge of the incident and knowledge that these people had seen the incident and were threatening them and all kinds of things like that. Now, many people believe that these men in black are actually CIA agents. In fact, if you watch History Channel's Project Blue Book, which is a great show, it's historical fiction, but it's a fun show to watch. They portray the men in black as former CIA agents who kind of went rogue and wanted to bring out the UFO enigma to the public. So many people believe that these men in black figures are actually CIA agents. But others, such as paranormal investigators like John Keel in his famous Mothman Prophecies, argues that these people actually, these agents, are at least some of the time apparently part of the actual phenomena. Because how else could they know, unless they're part of the phenomena themselves, or doing some kind of government research by using UFOs or something else like that? How else could they know that these people involved had actually had some kind of experience? Further, they acted in very bizarre ways and oftentimes very threatening ways. For example, they would oftentimes behave and act as if they were of paranormal origin themselves. They would not quite fit in. They would be very odd. They would glide across the room, as Keel said. They just had an eerie aura about them. They oftentimes had an oriental look, very dark complexion. They were oftentimes just seemingly out of place, both with their clothes, their car, the way they acted. And so the men in black phenomena is very mysterious in and of itself. And many tie it and just assume that it's tied to the CIA. But folks such as John Keel argues that they're not really CIA agents. They are actually part of the overall UFO phenomena itself. Because oftentimes when we see it with the UFO phenomena is not just so-called spaceships or something like that. We see all kinds of paranormal activity, such as ghost sightings, cryptid sightings, Bigfoot, Mothman. We have poltergeist activity where things will come flying off the shelves. Footsteps will be heard. Car doors shutting when there's no car doors. Baby voices and crying being heard when there's no baby around. And so Keel and others think that these men in black really are not part of the CIA per se, at least not sometimes, but they are actually part of the phenomena. But another strange aspect of this phenomena regarding the CIA is something that we're not oftentimes very well versed with, and I wasn't either until I started doing my own studies with UFOs and the paranormal, and that concerns the investigation and research of the CIA on actual paranormal activity themselves. Richard Dolan says this: for years, the CIA and many military units, along with their Soviet counterparts, performed experiments to harness the human mind, including ways to create a programmed killer, for example, a Manchurian candidate. So in 1972, when the CIA approached Dr. Harold Putoff of Stanford Research Institute, SRI, in Menlo Park, California, to initiate a that is parapsychological, research program, it was simply working an old game with a new twist. If clairvoyance could really be used for espionage, one could spy on enemy installations at practically no cost. It was at least worth a try, especially since it was known the Soviets were pursuing it. Now, you might be thinking this is a conspiracy theory, this is just really wacky, this is fringe kind of assertions. Let's see what the actual CIA historian himself says about such research. Haynes says, CIA also maintained intelligence community coordination with other agencies regarding their work in parapsychology, psychic phenomena, and remote viewing experiments. In general, the agency took a conservative scientific view of these unconventional scientific issues. There was no formal or official UFO project within the agency in the 80s, and agency officials purposely kept files on UFOs to a minimum to avoid creating records that might mislead the public if released. Now, I might say that's the CIA historian saying that. Maybe that's not true. But he does admit certain things in this document that people have thought for years, that the CIA does have a role in ufological research. They did tell the Air Force how to conduct their own research and how to play it down, that they were lying about CIA agent identity, that they were infiltrating civilian UFO research organizations, and even now that they are investigating parapsychology and such things as that. Now, he says they took a conservative scientific view of these unconventional scientific issues. We'll see if that's the case. I'm not sure if you can hold to scientific view of the unscientific. Okay, let's see what. I wanted to see if the CIA had anything on their own website regarding this. I found Haynes' book on CIA's website. It's also available at Amazon, but it's there for you free in a PDF form if you want to look at it there at cia.gov. But I was surprised to find out that not only was Haynes' book available on the CIA website, so were their documents, or some of them, regarding their own research on the paranormal. Let's look at some of their own documents. In this document called Investigating the Paranormal, let's see, we published this week a paper by Doctors Targ and Puthoff, who just referenced a few minutes ago, which is bound to create something of a stir in the scientific community. The claim is made that information can be transferred by some channel whose characteristics appear to fall outside the range of known perceptual modalities, or more bluntly, some people can read thoughts or see things remotely. So seeing thoughts would be clairvoyant. Seeing things remotely is remote viewing, where a person can view something from afar off and basically have knowledge of things that are not tied to space and time. This document talks about experiments that it says demonstrates that Mr. Zhang Baoxing possesses paranormal abilities. He can make small objects penetrate obstacles. After such penetrations, the microscopic structure and properties of the objects do not show any observable changes. This document, looking at the table of contents, talks about a whole host of weird paranormal things. For example, breaking through the obstacles of space for psychic writing, an experiment of using psychic powers to break needles and make them whole again, analysis of tests on transmission of sensations through channels in 25 psychic children, an experiment into the psychic magnification effect, reliability of experiments in human psychic vision, some ideas on our understanding of diagnosis by human X-ray vision, a general discussion of parapsychology, and so forth. This document, reading the abstract, says this article uses strict scientific procedures, one-of-a-kind test samples, videotape, and high-speed photography to demonstrate the objective existence of the paranormal ability of breaking through spatial barriers. It also shows the physical process of this ability. It demonstrates that through the function of the paranormal ability, the macro body was able to pass through the wall of a container and be removed, but no visible damage to the wall or the container was detected. A recent book came out last summer of 24, by a very well-known government insider who ran the Pentagon's research into UFOs, or what they're calling now unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. And his book is called Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. And he ran the program called the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. He resigned from that position to take his message of his knowledge of UFOs public, and is well known now for History Channel's Unidentified, his discussions, his talks about this topic, and now his book Imminent. And this just came out in 2024. And he says, regarding these military projects, Great Skills was a long-running program that Army intelligence used to recruit young soldiers whom they had identified as having special talents and that they could train and use as soldier spies. How they teased out those abilities, I was never told. How about remote viewing? Know what that is? Nope, I responded. I was later told by Gene that the Great Skills program was also called Gray Fox. Gene was a MICACP, which stood for Military Intelligence Civilian Accepted Career Program. Gene was a civilian intelligence case officer who worked for the Army. I later found out that Gene also spotted and recruited soldiers into another highly secret operation called Stargate, or at least what was left of it. He never made it clear if his efforts with Stargate were ever part of the official mission of Gray Fox. Stargate was embedded in the federal government, run for years by the CIA and later the DIA. Recruits were trained to spy upon enemies, but not in the usual way. Stargate trained super soldiers to spy on hard targets using their psychic gifts. No, I'm not kidding. This was an official U.S. government program. Elizondo claims to himself been trained in remote viewing, where a person can be in one place in the world and view remotely somewhere else. That can be used for spying, for trying to attack, seeing what's around the area. And this is just amazing to me that the CIA and other government agencies were not only studying such phenomena, but trying to harness it and admitting that such paranormal activity actually exists in an objective, real way. Go to their website yourself. I'm not making this up. These documents are straight from their own website, the ones I showed you a little bit ago. So the CIA has, and probably still does, have a very active role in the study of UFOs. We've seen that they have admitted it from their own historical documents. They have been involved in spying, not just overseas, but also with domestic organizations such as civilian UFO groups. They have impersonated Air Force officers. They have tried to desensitize the public to UFO phenomena, and they have tried to harness paranormal powers to be able to spy on people and to try to see what they can do with other people's abilities in those areas. So very fascinating stuff regarding the CIA. It is without a doubt and unquestionable that they had a role and likely still have a role in research in ufology. So I hope that this episode was interesting and informative to you. If you like this material, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. What do you think about this kind of stuff? I'll leave a link to some of these resources in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.